Good evening. Welcome to the Dahlgren Chapel of the Sacred Heart. In this sacred space, generations of students and faculty, staff, and alumni have encountered God in the sacraments, in prayer, and in communal reflection. Georgetown's Jesuit tradition of education has always prized both the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of virtue. It is the transformation of the whole person, from ignorance to understanding, from isolation to dialogue, from indifference to moral responsibility. This is what characterizes the best of what a Jesuit education can be like at Georgetown. As you know, so much of the discourse in our nation and our world has hardened into a rancorous noise. It's distracted us from our ability to have informed, honest, even prophetic dialogue about the issues today. The Dahlgren Dialogue is an invitation to offer a prayerful posture to engage political, academic, and spiritual concerns of our day. And framing these dialogues within a place of prayer and worship can sustain and empower us to be more active participants. So the Office of Mission and Ministry, in collaboration with the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, continues this series, The Francis Factor. Tonight, the leadership of the world's pastor. Tonight, our distinguished panel will share reflections on this crucial moment of Pope Francis's pontificate, 12 years as pastor of the church, 12 years of moral leadership in our world. We begin and end each Dahlgren Dialogue with prayer. I would now like to invite Georgetown student Alejandra Cova from our School of Health to come forward and lead us in prayer.
Please stand if you're able. Loving God, as Francis, our beloved Pope, suffers from illnesses, we come before you in prayer. We ask you to look with mercy on your servant Francis, who serves you devotedly and tirelessly as a Jesuit, a priest, an archbishop, a cardinal, and as Pope. Most of all, he serves you as a faithful Christian, sharing the love, mercy, and compassion that your Son showed to all he encountered in his public ministry, especially those who were poor or in any way struggling. During his papacy, Francis has striven to imitate your Son by reaching out to all who were feeling abandoned, ignored, or neglected, making it his special task to care for those who are in any way sick. As Francis himself now faces illnesses, help the doctors, nurses, and medical team who care for him. Help him bear any pain with grace and help him to heal quickly. Send your Holy Spirit, your own breath, into his weakened lungs to heal him and inspire him as the vicar of Christ. We ask all this in your holy name. Amen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you, Father Mark. Thank you, Alejandra. Welcome to all of you here with us in person in Dahlgren Chapel on this Feast of St. Joseph. A special welcome to the more than 1,400 of you who are watching and joining us online. I'm Kim Daniels, the director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life here at Georgetown. So 12 years ago today, not today, excuse me, but 12 years ago, Pope Francis explained that he chose the name Francis because St. Francis was a man for the poor, a man for peace, and for creation. In these last 12 years, he has been a pope for the poor, a pope for peace, and a pope for creation. He is the world's pastor, and his pontificate has been one of spiritual renewal and structural reform, offering a dynamic and hopeful vision of the church as a home with open doors for everybody. He has a special focus on those most in need of mercy and accompaniment, and especially for the poor. Tonight, we have a wonderful group of respected leaders here for our conversation on Pope Francis' leadership. First, we have Blaine Bieni, a student at Georgetown University studying government with a minor in religion, ethics, and world affairs, and a student leader in campus ministry, Catholic ministry here at Georgetown. Anna Rowlands is the St. Hilda Chair in Catholic Social Thought and Practice at Durham University, with a particular expertise in politics and theology, synodality, and migration. She provided support to the Office of the Synod of Bishops and the Dicastery for Integral Human Development during the Synod on Synodality. Inez San Martin is an Argentine Catholic journalist, the Vice President of Communications for the Pontifical Mission Societies, and the former co-editor and Rome Bureau Chief for Crux. And joining us via Zoom today are Cardinal Sean O'Malley and Chris White. Cardinal Sean O'Malley is the Archbishop Emeritus of Boston, a close advisor to Pope Francis, the president of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, and a leader on the issue of migration. Chris White is the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter and a Vatican analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. And so now let's get started with you, Cardinal Sean. We're so grateful that you could take time to be with us here with all you have going on, so thank you very much for your commitment to being with us. You're a cardinal, you're a retired archbishop, you're a Franciscan. You've devoted much of your ministry to serving people on the margins, especially our migrant brothers and sisters, and you've known Pope Francis since before his election 12 years ago. You have many roles in Rome, including on Pope Francis' Council of Cardinal Advisors, and you've been a friend and supporter of our initiative from the very beginning. So in light of all of that, please share with us what you've learned about Pope Francis as a person, a pastor, and a pope. I'm also particularly struck that he's the first Jesuit pope and that he chose the name Francis. And I'm wondering how he's brought those themes together in his vocation and in his mission and ministry as our Holy Father.
Well, thank you, Kim. I'm just sorry that I can't be there with you at Georgetown. Unfortunately, I have other commitments here in Boston today. Otherwise, I would have joined you. And thank you for doing this. It's very fitting that it is the feast of St. Joseph, the very anniversary of the inauguration of Pope Francis. And as you mentioned, it was my privilege and joy to have known him when he was still the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and to visit him there and see his ministry. And so much of the way that he conducted himself as Archbishop is reflected in the way that he has lived out the papacy. He was a man who was very close to the people. He chose not to live in the bishop's palace, but lived in a small apartment at the chancery there, and did his own cooking, took public transportation, was always very close to the poor and to the immigrants. Someone said that Buenos Aires is the second largest Catholic city in the world. It's a city of millions of people and thousands upon thousands of very poor immigrants from Bolivia and Paraguay and other places. And they were a very special object of the pastoral love of Archbishop Jorge Bergoglio, who spent a lot of time among those people. And we see his great interest in immigration. Certainly, Argentina is, like the United States, a country of immigrants. And the Holy Father's family were Italian immigrants themselves. His simplicity of lifestyle, his closeness to people, what the Holy Father always uses that term, vicinanza, the closeness to the people. This has had so many repercussions in the way that he has lived out his papacy, always being close to people, choosing to live in the Domus Santa Marta rather than being isolated in the papal apartments of the Apostolic Palace, being close to the little people, his love for the simple people, and his great desire to be a pastor to them. I was so struck and moved by one incident that took place when he was conducting one of his Wednesday audiences and spied a very deformed individual, a man who had a terrible congenital disease that resulted in terrible disfiguration. And the Holy Father waded his way through the crowd and embraced him and kissed him. And his name was Vinicio Rivas. And after that, when he was interviewed by the press, he was crying. He said, "You know, when I get on a bus, nobody wants to sit next to me. When people see me, they turn their gaze away from me. And the Holy Father loves me and embraced me and was not ashamed of me." Uh, the Holy Father's closest to people, especially in their suffering, is something that has touched the hearts of us all. Uh, all of us have lived through a lot of holy years in our life. I think there's been quite a few since I was born, but the one that stands out the most is that year of mercy, and in many ways reflects one of the central themes in the life and the ministry of Pope Francis. He is a man of mercy. He is a man who is looking for ways to build bridges and bring healing to a broken and suffering world.
Let me pick up on one of the themes that you mentioned here, Cardinal Sean, and it's one that's bringing a lot of division, sadly, to our country here today, and it's migration. We know that from the beginning of his pontificate, migration has been a particular theme and focus of Pope Francis, as you mentioned. Why is he so committed to defending immigrants and refugees? How has he expressed that? And how does that challenge us as members of one family of faith?
Well, Pope Francis, being someone from outside of Europe, being from the global South, has a different viewpoint of the world and the church. And he certainly is so aware of the sufferings and the injustices of so many people. And that is what is the cause of so much migration in our world today. And the Holy Father has that very Franciscan view of being a universal brother. The way that he has named cardinals from all over the world and from some of these very tiny places is just one more indication of how he's trying to make the church a church that goes to the periphery and finds our faithful there. And so certainly what is happening in our world with so many tragic situations of war and famine and oppression has caused people to look for a new home. And I always say here in Boston, the church is here because of the famine in Ireland. 1 year after the famine, a third of the population of Boston was Irish Catholics, and we were not particularly welcomed. They were not happy to see us, but I think we have made a contribution. The Holy Father is anxious for migrants to be accepted and integrated into the countries that they are going to. He talks about an exchange of gifts. We certainly, when we receive them with hospitality, receive the gifts of their youth, their energy, their values, their faith. And the Holy Father, of course, is calling for a more humane and fraternal world. The beautiful encyclical Fratelli Tutti, quoting St. Francis, that we are all brothers and sisters. And that same theme he repeated so eloquently in Lisbon last year when he said, todos, 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 everyone, everyone, everyone. We are all brothers and sisters, and we all have an obligation to take care of one another and take care of this, our common home. The Holy Father was one of the first to point out that the deprecation of the environment has its worst repercussions for the poor. They're the ones that suffer the consequences of that. And the Holy Father's great love for the poor and has been an inspiration to so many people. He certainly is reaching out to the whole world beyond just the members of our church.
Well, thank you for that. And before we let you go, maybe one last question. Very brief answer, if you had to pick the most important element of Pope Francis' pontificate, of his approach, what would you say that would be?
Well, I think Pope Francis has humanized the papacy, and in many ways humanized the Curia. He has completely changed the atmosphere of the Curia and has made it much more inclusive. I remember a couple years ago, one of the prefects, Cardinal Stella, was talking about the odd limit of visits, and he said, it used to be in the past that when bishops came to Rome, they came with fear and trepidation. He says, now we're the ones that are nervous because Pope Francis expects the Curia to be at the service of the universal church. And we see how he has brought in women to leadership roles in the church. The new governor of the Vatican City is Sister Raffaella, and the new prefect of the congregation or the dicastery for consecrated life, Sister Simona Brambilla. So many women serving on different boards, even the congregation for bishops. The Holy Father is trying to make the church everyone's home, and his whole introduction of the theme of synodality is a new way for us to be church, to listen to one another, to respect each other, to pray together, and to seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit to unify our church. I think this is one of the very exciting things that the Holy Father is leaving us as his legacy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Cardinal Sean, and thank you so much for being with us. This really appreciate your time. And Anna, maybe now I'll turn to you, and we'll ask you the same question I just asked Cardinal Sean. So when you look at Pope Francis' pontificate, what do you think of as the most important element of his leadership? How has it changed you? How has it changed the church?
So in a way, those are two separate questions for me, very briefly. So on the significance, I think that there's this extraordinary sense that people have in Pope Francis, that they have almost a parish priest in Pope Francis, wherever they are in the world, that he is a kind of world pastor, not like a global CEO, but this sense, as Cardinal O'Malley was talking about, of real proximity to people's lives. And that's an extraordinary thing for people who've never met him, who've never been there, to feel this extraordinary sense that he is their pastor. I had a conversation not long ago in London with somebody who said to me, I have no direct affiliation with a church at all, and yet when I think about who speaks for me and my values, the one figure that I can point to in the world, who I feel when he speaks, I think, yes, you speak for me, is Pope Francis. Very quickly, in terms of myself, he challenges me as a theologian. Pope Francis is not very keen on theologians sometimes, I think it would be safe to say. But he challenges us very deeply to say, whose questions do you answer and take seriously in your work? Who do you accompany and who accompanies you as a theologian? And those are really convicting questions for me.
Wonderful, and that builds on what Cardinal O'Malley said as well, this idea of humanizing, a humanizing presence. Chris, thank you for being with us late at night in Rome. We really appreciate it. So tell us what you think of as the most important element of Pope Francis' leadership and how maybe that has changed you, changed the church. What's your quick response?
Yeah, I think certainly early on we heard so much talk of the image of a field hospital. And his real desire for the church to be there to accompany those who are wounded in life. And I think back to traveling with him to the Democratic Republic of the Congo a few years ago, where he heard these testimonials from primarily women that had really suffered the ravages of war. They had been raped, their bodies mutilated, and watching him sort of touch those wounds really, for all of us journalists that were accompanying him, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, and it really, we're a jaded bunch normally, and I think that sort of example of humanity and outreach to those on the margins is something that I think is just a wonderful witness, regardless of who you are. As Anna said, there are those that have no affiliation with the church, but have seen examples like that. And that's something that it's easy to latch on to and want to get behind.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Inez, how about yourself? What do you think of most important element, how you've been changed or not?
So funny enough, His Eminence mentioned Vinicio Riva, who I was going to talk about, because in my experience, Pope Francis has been trying to show us that we're supposed to live the gospel, not preach the gospel, not just talk about what it means to be a Catholic, but actually live the life of a Catholic, which of course means it's the life of someone who's willing to touch the wounds of Christ, and the wounds of Christ are there in the migrant, in the homeless, and in the different circumstances of life. And then at a personal touch, what he's taught me, my interactions with him, the one I cherish the most is the one that was unscripted. So I've got the chance to meet Pope Francis when I was on the plane with him many times. Christopher, I've had the chance to greet him whenever he greeted big mandatories from all over the world, from Trump to my own Argentinian president. But in 2013, I was running the international press office for World Youth Day, and I got the chance to I was literally across him on the helicopter. I shouted at him, "I want to give you a hug." And he's like, "Well, come and get it." And so I went there and I got it. And I got my hug with the Pope. I shared a very special personal moment with him. And to this day, that the advice he gave me about my life of prayer, that in that unscripted moment, remains my most special interaction. And sometimes today we plan our lives to the T, and we know what we're doing for breakfast and what we're having for lunch and what we're wearing and where we're going to the gym and who we're talking to, who we're ignoring on the phone when they call. And sometimes truly that unexpected, unscripted moment changes your life forever.
So many unscripted moments. That's beautiful. Thank you. Blaine, how about yourself? What do you think of as the most important element of his leadership?
Yeah, to build on what both Anne and Chris have just said, I think the word that came to my mind was just love, and not just love that's internal, but love that's expressed in all of his encounters with people throughout the world. I think that especially when I consider my faith, it's so easy for it to just be something of love between me and God, but it's a whole other level to bring it into my relationship with people I know and those that I don't. And I think that you see that in a lot of those encounters that have just been shared in this quick 1-minute discussion. And I know I'll share mine in the second round, but I just see these images of him smiling so widely with children, with people that have experienced inexplicable tragedies in their life, and I think he just spreads that love with every person he meets, whether he knows them or he does not.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That's beautiful. Anna, let me turn to you. So you are a respected theologian. You're a voice on Catholic social teaching that's respected around the globe. You've been a key leader with multiple roles in the Synod on Synodality. This is obviously, for so many of you will know, that this is Pope Francis' global effort of spiritual renewal and structural reform aimed at better enabling the church to live out our gospel mission. So we've talked a lot about Pope Francis the person in these personal moments. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Synod on Synodality, why it's so important to Pope Francis? And in particular, I want to come back to a phrase you've used that I go back to time and time again, which is that the Synod is about shaping an outward-facing church that's healthy on the inside. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I think the first thing that's really important to emphasize is that it was the bishops who asked the Pope for a synod on synodality. This is not something that Pope Francis simply originated by himself. For him, it's both the trajectory that comes from the Second Vatican Council, and it's a very specific response to the question of the needs of the church in this moment. So in one sense, it's really important to him because he was asked by his own bishops in a collegial fashion. The second is that I think, as one Italian church historian noted, this is simply synodality to being the conciliar church. So for him, this is that kind of flow through. But I also think he thinks simply that we cannot be the church in this generation calling forth all of the talents, the skills, the charisms, the gifts poured out on the church without focusing on synodality. So it's a way of discerning together the gifts of the Spirit in this moment for the needs of a very, very broken world. And synodality is the way that together we can walk a path that listens, that discerns together, that draws on those talents and skills and gifts of all, and does that most of all for mission. So there's a direct thread that connects Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel for the sake of the world, to the synod. And if we can't see that the synod is about that mission that he talks about in Evangelii Gaudium, then I think we miss the point. And the final point that I'd make really about how sort of I see something in the synod that I think is so key to Pope Francis's vision of the church, full stop, is this vision that he genuinely believes, and it's there in the title of Fratelli Tutti, we are mutually entrusted. And we live in a moment where there is a crisis of trust. And there's a crisis of trust amongst ourselves, there's a crisis of trust in in institutions, including in the church, and there's a crisis of trust in our politics. And the Christian response to that, and it's there in the wording of the final document of the Synod, is you don't overcome a crisis of trust by telling people who don't trust to trust more, nor do you solve it by an overload of information. We're not like computers, we're not machines, we're storied creatures who need to understand that we are bound to each other in a level of entrustment in Christ. And even where trust is broken, we still have that obligation to recognize the ways in which we remain mutually entrusted. And so in repentance, with a focus on a mission that calls us beyond the brokenness of ourselves, we have a capacity to recognize again that mutual entrustment on the road together and to proclaim the gospel with joy as we walk. That, for me, is crucial to Pope Francis's vision of the Synod.
I love it because I love that it shows how you're talking about why the Synod and the process that we've been going through, this walking together, is really responding to the moment we're in right now. And there's one other way, there's many ways, but one way in particular that I think of Pope Francis responding to the moment we're in right now, and that is his emphasis over the last 12 years on Catholic social teaching. What has he emphasized? Has he deepened and strengthened? Am I getting that right when I say that's been a particular emphasis of his?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely has been. And I think what's really crucial to see again is that he places Catholic social teaching at the center of his pontificate and at the center of the life of the church. So Catholic social teaching isn't an optional extra for Pope Francis that's kind of tagged on the side as a way of speaking to the world. He makes it integral to his entire vision of the life of the church in and for the world. And in saying that, he also turns it back inwards. So he talks about the importance of the principles and vision of Catholic social teaching for how we live the life of the church, not just what we have to say to policymakers down the road here or wherever it might be. I also think that what's kind of central to his vision is trying to give us tangible ways. It's by living, as Ines was saying, it's gesture, it's habits and practices for Pope Francis. So he takes much of the language of Catholic social teaching that sometimes can seem a little bit abstract to people, even if still really important, and he tries to talk about what that means in reality. So a central bridging phrase for him that's kind of new but interpreting the old is social friendship. So how do we take the idea that we're all sisters and brothers? That's a kind of idea we can broadly get hold of. But he wants us to turn that into a practice. The practice that makes real our kinship is practices of social friendship. And that can happen at every level, from a neighborhood to a policy level. And he constructs a notion of dialogue and the need for a politics of dialogue from that as well. So I think that's crucial. And I also think that we talked already a little bit about this, his emphasis on migration, which has been there right from the beginning all the way through this pontificate, is crucial. And he moves the secular debate onwards. So he doesn't simply fixate in a way that often the secular press does and the secular discussion on who belongs, who doesn't belong, who's allowed across a border, who isn't allowed across a border. He takes it back and roots much of what he says, first of all in the notion that everybody is dignified, but also in the notion of the universal destination of goods, that the created goods of the world are destined by the Creator to meet the real needs of every human being who is born. And that reality means that we have to think about the question, not just of rights of entry, but much more of that picture of the goodness of creation, the destination of the intended destination of those goods to meet the needs of all, and how our approach to migration, including questions of compassion and so forth, actually is able to wrestle with that question of the universal destination of goods. And then finally, I think Laudate Si, it's the anniversary, we can't not mention Laudate Si. Again, that encyclical is not an environmental encyclical. People often say to me, oh, Pope Francis is encyclical on the environment. It's on integral ecology. And I think what's really important is he sees this thread of connection between all of the different crises and critical questions that we face in this age. And he's able to thread together the connection. And he turns us, the very first sort of phrasing of that document, first of all, it's a language of praise, not of crisis and anxiety. And secondly, he tries to help us literally see things differently. So he introduces the document with the idea, this is about a contemplative gaze. The difference is made by how you look at the created world, and your capacity to begin with a receptive notion, with what you receive. That's the first activism for a Christian, is a reception, an active contemplative reception. That changes the dialogue.
And I love just how you ended and in your conversation about social friendship as well. These are abstract concepts in a sense, and one of Pope Francis' gifts is making them real for us as individuals. We can all think about what it means in this moment to live social friendship. We can all think about that receptivity in our lives. Thank you. Chris, we want to turn to you now. And first of all, thank you again for being up so late in Rome. Chris planned to be here with us, but of course with the Holy Father's health, he has had to stay in Rome because every Vatican reporter is there right now, of course. And we're so glad to have you with us however we can, and thank you again. I know we're all praying and thinking of the Holy Father right now. And so first, before we get into our conversation, can you give a little bit of an update on the Holy Father's health and where we are?
Sure. Thank you, Kim. And it would be wonderful to be with so many friends in person, but I'll take what I can get from here. So today is day 34 that Pope Francis has been hospitalized. And I think it's fair to say that today he received one of the most positive reports that he's received in the 5 weeks that he's been in hospital. We just learned a few hours ago that the Pope is no longer relying on a ventilator at night to help him breathe, which she's been relying on the last 2 weeks. It's a very positive sign, and from what I understand, was a very necessary hurdle to overcome to begin talking about any sort of release to go back to the Vatican. We also heard just a few days ago, about 48 hours ago, Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles will be visiting Rome on a state visit in just a few weeks, and that the Pope intends to meet with the King and Queen. And that is also taken as a very positive sign that the Pope intends to be back in the Vatican and at work. But I think you have to look at this. This is an 88-year-old who already had a number of serious underlying health conditions when he went into hospital, and he's going to be leaving the hospital in an even more fragile state. And I think it's fair to say that the sort of Pope that we're used to with the energy and the spontaneity will be diminished for some time, and perhaps for the foreseeable, the rest of his papacy. And Anna used a word earlier. She talked about the Pope's way of acting with gestures. And I think that is something that he will continue to prioritize. We've already seen some of these gestures in hospital. The decision over the weekend to announce this sort of 3-year timeline for the Synod, I think is a strong gesture on the Pope's part to remind people what his priorities are, even when he is not sort of out there as we're used to seeing him. So I think it's a period of uncertainty, but clearly he's signaling that he's still in charge, and he expects folks to fall in line and on the Synod to begin implementing it.
Well, thanks for that. And let's turn a little bit to other kinds of structural reforms. So we can talk about Pope Francis's reform of the Roman Curia, steps to clean up Vatican finances, obviously steps on clergy sex abuse. Can you tell us what impact these reforms have had, where they've fallen short, and what might we be looking for in the future? What remains to be done?
I think on the abuse question, it's fair to say that the letter of the law is probably never been stronger in terms of holding bishops and priests accountable for abuse and cover-up. The challenge is really in the culture and the implementation of the law that's on the books. And I think, Cardinal Sean was with us earlier, and Kim mentioned his leadership at the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. And last year, we saw the commission issue its own audit of the church's handling of abuse. It was sort of a first ever report of its kind. And it was rather remarkable to see a church institution like the Pontifical Commission of Minors point the finger at the Vatican itself and say, look, there still lacks a lot of transparency in how these cases are handled. So today, when a bishop is removed because of either abuse or cover-up, we're still not told that that was the reason why the bishop was removed. And I think that is just a glaring omission when it comes to transparency. On finances, I mean, Vatican finances are so incredibly murky, and it's incredibly difficult to understand where things stand. I think Pope Francis has made great strides in getting just getting a sense of what's on the books, which one might not think should be such a challenge, but it has proven to. Part of that, it's an Italian system that's very difficult to navigate. But the reality is we don't have clear numbers on what the Vatican's deficit actually is. We hear all sorts of talk about the Vatican's pension problems that it faces, but there's no number to go with that. So these are in conversations with cardinals and people that work in the Roman Curia. I think this is still very much an ongoing challenge when it comes to reform. And if we could have a conclave in 2 months or 2 years or 20 years, and I think this is going to top people's agenda of issues that they're concerned about.
Let's switch gears a little bit, Chris. You obviously are the Vatican reporter for the National Catholic Reporter right now, but you've also been the national correspondent here in the United States. We hear a lot about the division among U.S. Catholics, but we also should remember that Pope Francis is enormously popular. Over 75% of American Catholics view him very favorably. And at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that there are differences in priorities and leadership emphases among different U.S. Catholics. In your reporting, what are some examples of this? What are the sources of it? What are the impacts of this division? And what might we see some of the broader support for Pope Francis? Where does that come out as well?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned those numbers of the support that Pope Francis receives among American Catholics, and those are sort of poll numbers that any politician would kill for right now. I think, look, the opposition to Pope Francis is primarily in the United States and in the Anglosphere more broadly. And I think it comes from a number of well-funded groups that have deep pockets and a large megaphone that doesn't necessarily reflect the realities that you find in the pews. I think if you go to most American parishes, you find deep love for Pope Francis, and that's widely shared across the political spectrum. I think, we are in an environment where you have, the sitting vice president of the United States, the current sort of border czar, that has really tried to distort what Catholic social teaching says about migration and try to paint Pope Francis's stance on migration as somehow deviating from longstanding Catholic tradition. And that, of course, is echoed by certain institutions, certain media channels, particularly certain Catholic media channels, that have this mediating, influence and perhaps sometimes, distorting influence that shapes the perspective of some Catholics, and that's unfortunate. But I think that's just focusing on the negative. If you look at on the positive side of things, as I said earlier, if you go into most parishes, that's not what you encounter. And we've talked some about the synod process, and I've been fortunate to cover the synod both here in Rome from its inception, but also through different conferences and other forums around the world. And I think if you talk to real synod skeptics that have been actually involved in the process, they've come to the synod with their own sort of anxieties or their own sort of wariness about the process. But in participating in it, they found that I think a lot of good faith actors and realize this is a process that is deeply needed. And it's that invitation to continue that I think the Pope is asking of the Church in this moment.
I always love when some critics of the synod, right, will come out and they say, I'm still not sure about the synod process, but my table was great. We had great conversations at my table, right? You see that sometimes. So Blaine, we've seen the view from Rome. Now let's get the view from Georgetown. You are a student leader here at Georgetown. You're deeply involved in Catholic ministry. And I think Pope Francis has been the leader of our church for most of your life, if not all. I understand you've had the chance to meet with him during your trip to Washington, D.C. in 2015. Tell us more about that, and tell us, as a young Catholic woman, how he's challenged you, how you see him and his leadership in his ministry.
Yeah, I would love to share that story. It is one that happened 10 years ago at this point, but it's still very vivid in my memory. So I was in middle school. It was around the time of confirmation when, as you said, like the faith is becoming a lot more alive for me, and it's becoming more of my choice and something that I nurtured. And, there was an email in my mom's inbox from our church, which I went to the parish school that she taught at, and it said, Pope Francis is coming. He's staying at the Vatican Embassy. Would you like to, meet him? And we said, of course. I mean, what kind of question is that? And it was part of the school group. They gathered all the Archdiocese of Washington students who were very involved in school or church. And I remember putting on our best uniform. Of course, you're meeting the Pope, but your best outfit. And we all gathered together on this school bus and just drove to the Vatican Embassy. And I remember, going through the security line and the anticipation and the waiting. And I remember more so the waiting, because you have a group of like 75, 100 kids about to meet the Pope. The conversations happening in that crowd were just like giddy and exciting. And I just remember as the sun was starting to set, he still hadn't come. I think he was at the Mass at the Basilica where he was canonizing some saints. And there were whispers of he might be too tired to even come to the crowd, and so there was like concerns that we wouldn't even get to see him, right? But no, he came, and the fleet of security in their big black cars, but when he came, he was in his humble green Fiat, right, waving to us, and we weren't sure if he was gonna go straight to his residence to sleep. It was late at night at this point, but he came and he wrapped around the car and started all the way at the end, the left side of the crowd, and shook every little child's hand that he could find that could, reach over that fence. And then I remember most vividly that in the center of this crowd was a child in a wheelchair. And it recalls the story that the Cardinal told at the beginning of this talk. He kind of got down onto his level and had an extended conversation with this child and gave him a blessing. And I believe that child's parent was also there. And I mean, I was only 12, 13, but I vividly remember this being a moment of like, as you said, he's like the CEO of our church, and yet he's coming down on our level, meeting with kids who probably couldn't have an elevated conversation with him. We don't know that much at that age, but finally then he came over to my side and shook our hand and gave us, God bless you. And it's a moment I'll never forget. It's a moment I love to share with my friends. I see a lot of them in the crowd, just meeting the leader of a faith that matters so much to us. And like you said, he felt like he was just our parish priest that we were meeting on a Sunday, and yet no, he's much more than that. And it just challenges me in my role as I'm, it's my last year of college, going into a career, that I stay humble and remember that, whoever you meet, regardless of their age or their experience or education, you have to meet them with humility and that love that I talked about at the beginning, because as we've been talking about, regardless of even if you're Catholic or not, we're all part of this global community, and we all, matter equally in God's eyes. So, yeah.
Thanks for that. So you're a leader at we have a vibrant Catholic community here at Georgetown, obviously, and you're a leader. And tell us a little bit about Pope Francis' impact on that community, on Catholics here, young Catholics.
Yeah. I think it's very important. I think especially we live in an age where we can access a lot of his actions and speeches online with the click of a button. There's so much that we're able to read and learn about what he's doing all over the world, and what he's calling specifically on young people to do, right? I think specifically for myself, I grew up hearing that, young people are leaving the church, and that, it's not really a space for us, but he actively, in his words and also his, the World Youth Day, as we talked about at the beginning, he directly calls on us to make sure we're staying active and nurturing our faith in our community, and beyond just in the church, but also outside with whether careers we're choosing, what we decide to study on campus. My thesis itself is on immigration. My friend is going to study environmental law after university. Like, a lot of the paths I'm seeing my friends that are very involved in campus and Catholic ministry, I'm seeing them pursue careers that nurture that same Catholic social teaching as we were talking about earlier. And I think that's not a coincidence. I think it's his teachings and his actions are having impacts on how we want to live our future as young people. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Inez, let's turn to you now. So Inez and I are old friends, and I knew you in your, we got to know each other the most, I think, in your role as a journalist at Crux, and you covered the papacy, went on so many trips with Pope Francis, and I really want to hear about that. I just want to talk for a second, though, about your role now as a leader at the Pontifical Mission Societies here in the United States, which is in service, it's a global network in service of the Pope, supporting missions in young churches with prayer and charity. And that's what you're doing now, and I can't think of a better person in this role. You've also, as I said, covered Pope Francis so closely, and you were the bureau chief for Crux, a major Catholic news outlet, like Pope Francis, you're from Argentina, you understand the major contributions Latin American Catholicism has made to the global church. So in what ways has Pope Francis' pastoral service and experience in Latin America shaped his leadership, shaped his approach? Can you first start us off with that, Phyllis?
Of course, well, I have to say, isn't Kim a great salesperson? I bet here, here I am, I'm suddenly, so yes, I have to say I did miss our gin tonics in the terrace in Rome, but that was all off the record conversations.
Off the record.
So his background, as His Eminence Cardinal Malley said at the very beginning, Pope Francis has been deeply nurtured by his reality in Argentina. For those of you who know nothing about Buenos Aires is an extraordinary city that back in the early 1900s had an 80% of the population that was first-generation immigrant. 80% of the population 100 ago was not born in Buenos Aires or Argentina. And today you have between 16 to 20% of the population in Buenos Aires living in slums, and 60 to 80% of those people are first-generation immigrants. So he has a very concrete idea of having touched the wounds of immigrants, but also having seen the impact the immigrant community has in the life of a country, both in terms of the workforce, in terms of the way the life is lived, and also the way in which the country, when immigrants are properly welcomed, the country benefits. Obviously, I do want to add, as Anna said, Pope Francis, when he talks about migration, it goes way beyond the border or no border headline that is very, very deep and very profound. But he does very often talk about the importance of caring for the countries from where people are fleeing, going back to the roots as to why people are risking a 6 months walk just not to get killed. It's not even, in many cases, about getting a better opportunity in life. It's literally, I don't want to get killed. I don't want my children to get killed. So I do think that experience of Pope Francis as an Argentinian shaped him a lot, as did Aparecida. Aparecida did not come up yet, but it was a big continental meeting of bishops in Latin America. Pope Francis, Cardinal Bergoglio got to write the document, and the document is very much rooted in the idea of a continent that is in a permanent state of mission, which means is a church that is in a permanent state of going out of the sacristy to find people where they are. We have gotten accustomed to, I'm going to just sit tight, wish upon a star, cross my fingers, and people will come en masse on Sunday. And that's not going to happen. We need to go out and encounter people. But the key word there is mission. The church does not have a mission. The church is a mission, and that mission is to answer the Great Command or the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations. We are not called to go around the world and end poverty, as bad as poverty is. We're not to go around the world and magically foster peace. We truly are called to go around the world and bring the gospel to all nations, and that is what the Pontifical Mission Societies does. As important as it is to work on the root causes for human evil, we get to be able to bring the faith, so we don't just battle human or kind of earthly poverty, but also we give the people, everyone in the world, the chance to encounter that forever loving God that we have. And when you think about the fact that of the 8 billion people in the world, 4.5 have not met a Christian. I'm not saying are not Christian, I'm saying they have not met a single person who can talk to them about Jesus and about what's going to happen on Good Friday and on Easter Sunday, because no one they know knows about it. I mean, that's a pretty big number when you think about it.
Well, and let me just follow up on that. I mean, you've traveled, we talked about your travels with the Holy Father when you were a journalist and how he has gone around the globe. Obviously, you've gone around the globe now in your role at the Pontifical Mission Societies. What do you think has been the impact of Pope Francis' travels to these countries that are on the peripheries, that too often get forgotten? How has he shaped our experience, the experience of people there, but our experience of ourselves as being a part of a global church?
I think he's been extraordinary at shining a light in different moments of his pontificates to the priorities of his pontificates. We saw it when he decided to go to the Arab Peninsula for the first time to talk about Fratelli Tutti and to sign a very important interreligious and ecumenical document. We saw it in 2021 when he risked many, many things to be the first pope in history to go back to the land of Abraham when he went to Iraq. An incredible trip, forever for me, for just arguably the most important and significant one in this pontificate, because it can actually have the power to preserve Christianity where Christianity was born. And I am very hopeful that we will soon be hearing about a pope, if not Francis, his successor, going to Syria. Because if the situation for Christians was dire in Iraq, it's even more dire right now in Syria. That trip, historic. Second trip, Papua New Guinea last year. It's an incredible country, small in terms of how many people live there. There are only 700 priests, most of them are missionaries. A priest, a missionary, an Argentinian, counted over 10,000 holy hours in preparation of Pope Francis' visit.
Wow.
So imagine the impact that visit had in the life of, in the faith of a country that is considered today first evangelization. Most of the population in Papua New Guinea are first-generation Christians or had never heard the gospel until recently. The third case is a country he hasn't gone to, he wants to go to. It's India. And I think India, an experience I had in India, shows the impact that the gospel and the Christian life can have on a life. And I'm sorry if I'm running out of time or I'm pushing. But I got to meet an incredible woman. Her name is Ramaya. She's a Dalit, so the lowest caste, converted to Christianity some 15 years ago. When she was 13, she got married to her maternal uncle and had 5 children with this 40-year-old man. Right now, he's bedridden. She had to stop working to care for her husband, met a missionary, converted to Christianity, banned her family from marrying off their daughters when they reached puberty at 12 or 13 years old, because she had understood the intrinsic value those girls have because of the fact that they're children of God. And that, to me, is what Pope Francis wants to bring to Universal Church, that message of we're all worth it, and there's a reason why we're worth it, and let's touch those wins and let's see that it's way beyond the politics of it all.
I love that. I love that. This message that we all have equal human dignity, and thank you for raising that. That's wonderful. We're about to go to audience questions. I'm sure you all have so much to ask our panel here. But before we do that, I just want to mention that we have some honored guests. We're just honored to have them with us tonight, and I just want to mention them very briefly. First, Miriam Violins is one of the church's leading theologians and canon lawyers. She's dedicated much of her life to service of the church and has been a leader in response to clergy abuse. She is the co-moderator of the Peter and Paul Seminar and has had several senior leadership roles at the Vatican and especially at the Synod on Synodality. Miriam, we're so grateful to have you here, and I would like to just applaud her service. Thank you. Another good friend from Rome. Also with us tonight, we have Cardinal Oswald Gracias, the retired Cardinal Archbishop of Bombay, the former president of the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, the holder of many, many leadership roles at the Vatican over the years, and a close friend and advisor to Pope Francis as a member of the Council of Cardinals. Cardinal Gracias, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for offering to share a couple brief comments with us, if that's okay. As a leader of the Church in Asia, can you just talk to us for a minute about what you see as the most important element of Pope Francis' leadership?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome to stand up if you'd like. And can we, while we're waiting, can we give Cardinal Gracias?
Thank you. I'm delighted to be over here and honored. Pope Francis, today is 12 years since he was installed, and I happened to have the joy, privilege of being for the installation and also having lunch with him after that. So, and the human side of Pope Francis, he told me, I finished the whole installation in an hour and a half. That's nice. I didn't give the people waiting too much. I felt the Holy Father is a person of deep faith, a person of prayer. The Holy Spirit senses the leader that we need at different times. And Pope Francis is When he began the papacy, all of us did not know what to expect because he was not much known outside Rome, not even in Rome with the Curia. He didn't have. But as I look back at these last 12 years, what an impact he has made on the church, on the individual. He has been fearless, courageous. And when you look at the world scene, I think he's maintained the integrity of the gospel, being faithful to what he sees in prayer has got to be done, not a respecter of popular opinion. It's just what the church has got to do. I think in prayer he takes all his decisions. It's, for me, as I look back again, I see more and more a great learning experience to be working with him, to see a person who's so committed, fearless. He listens to all of us. We have very frequent meetings, very frequent. We must have had about 50 meetings already, 52 or 53 of 3 days each, intense meeting discussing an agenda which he prepares. But at the end, he decides. He's in the driving seat. He knows what's to be done. And I think we feel so close to each other that we know that ultimately that's his decision. That's what he has felt in prayer. A man who's fearless. We've spoken about many things, dangers to his life. I can say that there have been threats, etc. And I was once saying, aren't you frightened? And he says, why be afraid of death? So that was his, his attitude. He didn't say it in so many words. I felt he felt, the Lord needs me here. The Lord wants me here. And the moment the Lord does not want me, he'll take me away. I think that's what he practically told me when we were speaking. His compassionate heart towards those in need. He doesn't want the church to be a castle protecting itself, but always reaching out to those in need. He consistently tries to see what would our Lord want of the church today. This is, I think, in some of our discussions, I can share that I asked him about synodality. What exactly is your vision? He turned to me, he says, Cardinal, I think Jesus wants the church to be synodal today. This is the mandate. This is what our Lord wants, his mandate, and therefore we must work towards it. So this is his consistent attitude. And he has made the church what it is, taken it to this point. I know there's criticism, and I've often said, what are the reasons why some people don't agree with this? He smiled. Sometimes I think there is no reason. Just, I suppose, his personalities. I pray for him because he's thank God he's improving. Should be meeting him in a couple of weeks again for a meeting. That's scheduled. I rang up day before yesterday. Is it on or are we off? But I think I suggested to ask him to postpone the meeting. I think he will not. Knowing Pope Francis, he wants to be there. And when we have discussions, he's told us more than once, I want to be there when you discuss, when you argue, when you differ. I don't want to have conclusions which you'll have come to, because I want to be part of your discussion. So we thank God for the gift of Pope Francis. I'm honestly, as you look from a distance, you begin to appreciate more and more. When you're with him, often we felt, but that this is a human discussion, but now I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much. There's so much to say, but I can't.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Cardinal Gracious and Miriam, for being with us tonight. And now it's time for your questions, everybody. So please, we have microphones in the aisles on the side. Please raise your hand. As my colleague John Carr often says, please phrase your question in the form of a question. And let's go ahead and get started. Please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Go ahead, right here. And please identify yourselves if you can.
Hi, my name is Carmen Lomelin. First of all, thank you for this very excellent discussion. It's been very enlightening. There are some that feel that Pope Francis, being Latin American, has not dealt effectively with Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua and his assault on the church, and with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. How do you feel about that?
Inez, would you like to talk to that, speak to that?
Unfortunately, too much, but yes. I think the situations are a little bit different. Fundamentally, I see where the criticism is coming from. I've had the opportunity to visit Nicaragua as a journalist traveling with Aid to the Church in Need. My computer, my phone, and my cameras were all seized by the police in Nicaragua at the airport. So the reason why I share this is it's very easy for us from the outside who are safe in our environments, in our home, in our churches, to demand a stronger word. But the truth is, on the ground, the reality is very, very, very complex. Every single time Pope Francis has said something against either Maduro or Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, the next day or the next week, there were very concrete repercussions. Either we're going to close Caritas, or we're going to burn down the Caritas office in Matagalpa, the Diocese of Bishop Alvarez, or we're going to arrest a bishop and ban him from his family for over 500 days. Similarly, in Venezuela, the situation in the country got to be very, very dire. Close to 85% of the population were hungry, a 6,000% yearly inflation rate. Imagine that. We're concerned here because we have a 3% yearly inflation rate. Imagine 6,000. The only non-profit organization with international ties allowed to function and feed the poor in Venezuela during those times was Caritas Internationales. So imagine what would have happened to the people in Venezuela if Pope Francis had said Maduro is a dictator, which he has said, by the way, because he repeatedly supported both the bishops of Nicaragua and Venezuela when they produced very strong condemning statements. And the bishops themselves said, no, the Pope has our back, but we understand why he needs to stay, if not quiet, not be as open as we would like for him to have been open. This is, historically, it's been a situation in which the Church, not defending something from the Holy See, can't actively condemn it because the situation would become even worse, which is, for instance, why today we hear Cardinal Parolin talk about we need dialogue in Syria. It's not because anyone thinks Christians in Syria are having a good time or are safe in any way or shape or form. It's because if we actively condemn it, it's going to become even worse than it already is. So there's a lot of diplomacy in the background.
Got it. Other questions? Kim, you want to find somebody back here? There we go. Thanks.
Hi, thank you very much. It's hard not to really love this Pope for so many reasons. And it's a part of what makes it difficult to ask a question that might be seen in some ways as being critical, which I don't intend. But I know that for some women in the United States, at least, and I gather in England, for example, and some other countries, the outcome of the synod sort of tabling for a time the question of women in the diaconate did not go down so well. And is this, today's discussion is really about a kind of global perspective on the contributions that this Pope has made to our church, and they're substantial. Is this a kind of lack of vision on the part of women for the kind of larger global perspective on it? Is there another way that women that are disappointed might feel in relation to how it was handled, and the Pope's stance on it, which has been sort of hands-off for now? I welcome anybody's insight on sort of how to respond to that.
Anna, that feels like a question for you.
It does. So I'm going to give you the most honest version of what I believe happened in the synod process in terms of the question of women and the diaconate. And particularly its move into the study group. So I think that the decision to move the question of women in the diaconate into a study group came about in part because it was judged by the synod members themselves. And it's really important to remember that the request for it to be moved into a study group came from the body of the synod itself. That wasn't simply an imposition by Pope Francis, because it needed, not just in a, let's put it into the long grass way, a longer and more detailed theological pastoral and synodal discussion, and the specific request for what makes what was handed from the synod into the study group different to the previous studies, which obviously we know have not been published, and there was a call through the synod process to publish those reports, which I think is really important to say. But as that was moved into the process, it wasn't a, please can we just rehash what we have already done on this question. It was specifically to ask the question about women in the diaconate from a synodal perspective. So asking, therefore, the question about mission. What are the needs, the mission needs of right now of the world that the church through its ministries is responding to? So how is ministry in service to mission, and how is the question of women and the diaconate part of that bigger conversation? Now, my sense is that that, in honesty and in good faith, is part of the reason. It may not be the sole reason, but it's part of the reason that that was not a, we can deal with this question in 3.5 weeks twice over and come to a committed conclusion. And there's a seriousness in that. There's a seriousness in it. Equally, there are other major questions about the place of women in the church, the current availability of roles that are not even being utilised by most dioceses. Miriam Violens is here this evening as a canon lawyer. She could, if there was more time, give you chapter and verse on the provisions already in existence in canon law that most dioceses and the curate are not using. And the question is, why? The language that the Synod document chooses is really significant. It talks about women and men equal in baptismal dignity. That language is crucial for reframing this conversation as not about women as if women are a problem or a separate category of being human in some way under the lens, but rather a question of the reciprocal, the healthy reciprocal relationships of mutuality and reciprocity between men and women in the church, equal in baptism, equal in their call to serve the kingdom, and a church that at the moment is a long way from fully realising that vision. And the diaconate question is one question in that bigger picture.
Thank you for that. And we could keep talking here all night. We have so many questions that we could ask, but I know that many here will be eager to continue the conversation, those of you who are here in Dahlgren Chapel in our reception in Healy Foyer in just a second. So I'm going to go now for a closing comment from each one of you, just a very quick closing comment. And Chris, I'm going to start with you. If you had to think of one word or phrase or image that you most associate with Pope Francis, what would it be?
Well, I think the image that I think of most often that both haunts and inspires me is the image of a solitary Pope Francis in March of 2020 in the early days of the pandemic, standing in St. Peter's Square. It was raining. It was a nasty night here in Rome, but really begging God to end the pandemic, but to also remind the world that we were in the same boat and to really beg for a new way forward. I don't think we've necessarily achieved that, but that image is one I think that will be one of the lasting images of this papacy.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Blaine, how about you?
I would say Pope Francis in a fiat, and not just because it's a funny thing, but because I think there's a lot more depth there. I think he's bringing Jesus' humility to the 21st century, and I think you don't see that with a lot of other leaders, maybe of other institutions.
Thank you for that. Inez?
An Argentinian hugging a Brazilian kid wearing a soccer jersey of the Brazilian team during World Youth Day, surrounded by 4 million people.
Love it.
And, embracing, if Brazilians can actually love an Argentinian, then a lot of miracles can happen. So I think
there's hope for us all.
Yeah, there's hope for us all. If we can overcome that, then the world can overcome everything else.
That's great. All right, Anna, how about yourself?
I'm going to go for the earnest option. I can't have the pandemic image because it's already gone. So I'm going to choose Pope Francis at the feet of Sudanese leaders, kissing the feet and begging politicians for peace.
The Pope of Peace, and that's a wonderful way to end this here tonight. I want to tell you all that you can see follow-up resources from this wonderful conversation at our site, along with a recording of this discussion that will be posted in a few days, also our social media channels as well. I want to be sure to thank our wonderful colleagues in the Office of Mission and Ministry, especially Father Mark Bosco, Ryan Craig, for their help to bring this wonderful dialogue together here tonight. Of course, I want to thank my wonderful colleagues at the initiative, John Carr, Kim Mazik, Anna Gordon, and Christian Sunin, as well as Kira Farrell. And Vero, thank you so much for being with us, our last dialogue here tonight. Thank you very much for all your help in being here. Alejandra Cova for your prayer. Also, I want to thank all of you who joined us here in person. And please do, if you're here in person, join us at our reception in Healy Foyer in just a moment to continue the conversation. And now, in one moment, just please join us in singing a hymn led by our colleagues in the Office of Mission and Ministry, The Joy of the Gospel, available in your programs. But first, please join me in thanking Cardinal Sean O'Malley, Chris White, Blaine Bayene, Inez San Martin, and Anna Rowland.